Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas, I'm going to be your host today, and this is episode 260, where we're going to be talking about how to gamify your marketing using different assets. Gamifying your marketing is one of the many ways to increase engagement for your audience, but people usually don't think about how this can be done using different products. That's why today we have Shawn of HyperKinetic Studios to discuss how he took their game and adapted it to a comic, providing two standalone products that organically cross-promote each other, creating a super value-packed experience for both players and readers. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everybody, and we're back, and today with us I have Shawn from HyperKinetic Studios. Shawn, how's it going, man?
Going great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, same here, and we're definitely glad to have you. So, Shawn, could you please just take a moment and share with us what you do at HyperKinetic Studios, what kind of like games and things that you guys do there, and also, if you don't mind, just share a little bit of things that you do in your personal life, specifically like hobbies or fun things that you like to do outside of work.
Sure. I'm a writer for HyperKinetic Studios. I'm mostly doing video games. I'm the lead writer of our RPG Epic Tavern, which is in early access now and available on Steam.
Cool.
I'm also writing the upcoming comic book adaptation, Tales from the Fantastical Crimes Unit, which it shelves in Halloween from Scout Comics. So that's coming right up.
Awesome.
And before I get into game work, it really took me 40 years to kind of break into games. So I tried a little bit of everything before that. I was a newspaper editor for years. I wrote and directed a movie called The Wrong House. I made another comic series, Escape from Jesus Island. So I'd kind of bounced around the indie ranks in a bunch of different, genres and mediums, trying to kind of find my foothold before eventually getting back to where I always wanted to work, which is games.
Awesome.
So for like hobby kind of stuff, I've got this terrible habit where I ruin all of my hobbies by doing them professionally. It's like I know that it's going to happen, and I still keep leaning into it. Editing comics. I edit maybe 50 comics a year, mostly through Scout.
Oh wow, okay.
And the process of editing comics has completely ruined my ability to just read a comic for fun. Because my eyes go into editor mode where I just kind of like zoom in and I'm on each line word by word, I can't just like absorb it for fun because I'm paranoid that I'm going to miss something. Live sports is another thing I used to love, but then I spent 4 years as a newspaper sports editor where I'm on the sidelines and dodging bodies. I've filmed mixed martial arts from a cage mounted stand where you got to like lean back to avoid punches. And you can't watch sports from the stands after that. It's just what do you. So I've kind of even movies, which I love. I was a film critic for years, and that kind of diminished my joy of that a little bit by oversaturation. So I've got this bad habit with hobbies. Fortunately, games have held up. They're the one thing that there's so much complexity to them that even with my natural inclination to overanalyze everything, I'll never reach the bottom of games. There's so much depth there. There's so much to study. So I don't feel like I'm ever going to burn myself out on that the way that I tend to with all my other hobbies.
Wow. And I think that's a good point, and why I think games is so, because it's funny the whole thing that you shared about the film thing, because I was a film major, went to film school and did some of that, and then after that, like to an extent, it's hard. You're right. It's hard to like when you study things or do things for so frequently, and then you go to try to watch or enjoy that medium, you start analyzing things and you're missing out on the key aspects. You're like, oh, like for example, oh, that wasn't in the previous shot. Like, you're still looking at all those things that way. So, but yeah, with games, and that's the thing I love about games too, is just there's so much depth, like you said, that like you can try to overanalyze things, and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna burn myself out, and there's no point. I'm just gonna enjoy it for what it is. So cool, man.
Yeah, and then and the thing is, when you get in this kind of muscle memory built up of taking notes while experiencing a certain thing, whether it's a sporting event or watching a movie, it just kind of wrecks your brain. Because then when you're not doing it, you feel like you're missing something. Like you feel like there's a part of the process you're supposed to be doing, but I don't need to take notes when I watch a movie anymore. So it's not helpful. But my brain still feels like I'm supposed to be doing it.
Oh, okay. Wow. But you know what? I mean, hey, that's probably one of your superpowers, right? Like in where you can really use it as a strength sometime. And in some instances, it's just inconvenient, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's some of both. You obviously learn a lot by over-analyzing a ton of different mediums and that sort of stuff. I mean, there's real advantages to it. But strictly from a fan standpoint, it can, you can kind of tank yourself by overexposure sometimes.
Definitely. Well, in a moment, we're definitely going to get into analyzing some stuff because, especially today with this topic we're going to be discussing, which I'll share with everybody in a minute. It's just something just really cool and love to dig into. But before we do that, I'd love to go into a little bit more about you by putting you through the Q Box round. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Q Box round is just simply a series of random questions I prepared for Shawn here. And, Shawn, are you ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. What's your favorite comic of all time?
For a series, I would say the 80s era Savage Sword of Conan. I was 11 years old when Conan came out. I was exactly the right age to be just fully sucked in by it, and I just absorbed anything I could get from that story world. For a single issue, oddly, I'm going to go with Mad Magazine 227, which they did a parody. It was a horror movie parody called Arbor Day. And it was playing on the 80s movie tropes, where, Friday the 13th and Halloween and every holiday has its own horror movie. And it was just, a goofy play on that. But it came out when I was 10 years old. And it was the first time that I think I truly comprehended the whole idea of parody. And that you could tell a comedy story in the shape of a horror story, and that the juxtaposition between the two genres would create comedy. That the clash between these two things that you're doing added value. And that story was really the first time it clicked for me. And I started doing stand-up comedy at 16. And in a weird way, I think that particular Mad Magazine issue sort of lit that fuse.
Wow, that's really cool. Like that realization from that particular magazine. And it's interesting you bring that up too, because for a lot of people who may not be familiar with this, in terms of, I think, delivery on some things, I'm thinking movie terms, and I'm sure the same could be found in comics. Comedy and horror actually have a lot of similarities with each other in terms of execution and stuff. So, well,
they totally do. Yeah, it's being comedy. The act of eliciting a laugh from someone is a combination of it's a surprise. It's a pleasant surprise from what was anticipated. And the horror movie is almost the opposite.
Yep.
It's the same experience. It's the surprise from what you anticipate. It's the variance from what you thought was going to happen that creates the moment, but it plays it in a different way. But it's very much the same dynamic. And obviously, horror and comedy play really well together.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's really cool. All right, next. What's your favorite anime of all time?
It's very different from what I think is the best anime of all time.
Okay.
But I'd go with Death Note, the 2006.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the recent one, but what the original did that I loved and that I always love in stories is that it engaged my imagination about how I would handle that situation. And I love stories that do that. They kind of pull you into it and make you sort of start storytelling it yourself in your own head.
And on top of it, there's a whole ethics aspect, like
right?
Is awesome. I remember watching that and getting wicked into it, and it's been inspiration for other things too. So cool. Let's see. Name one country you always wanted to travel to.
Let's go with Narnia. The thing that always bothered me about those books is that the kids were just so lame. And if they ended up as royalty, I could be running that place in a month. Narnia is ripe for conquering.
Fair enough. And especially if you're referencing at all I think the original BBC television series ones, because that was brutal.
Yeah.
Like
if they ended up royalty, I think I'd probably fare pretty well there.
Early bird or night owl?
By choice, I'd be a night owl, but I'm forced to be an early bird by two dogs. Like all things equal, 2 a.m. is kind of when I like to crash. Also got in this habit of the last couple of years that I think is really valuable, in that I try to spend the last hour before I go to bed every day laughing.
That's awesome.
So I do like an hour of comedy podcast like right before bed, and I think that's just like a nice kind of getting your head in a good state before drifting off to sleep.
I would take that as one of our tips for today, folks, because putting yourself in a good state of mind before you go to bed is always a good thing. And Shawn here has a good one, I think, to maybe follow or be similar to that, which is laugh before you go to sleep.
Well, especially if you have a brain like mine that's written a lot of horror stories. And, my brain isn't the kind of neighborhood you want to be walking around in at night. So if I can kind of turn a few extra streetlights on by laughing right before I go to bed, that's advantageous.
That's a good analogy. And then last but not least, the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing right now?
I'm actually replaying XCOM 2 War of the Chosen for probably the 5th time right now. But the running game, the thing that I've played the most I'm 50 years old. So I've been playing Madden for as long as it's existed. I've always been playing a franchise of Madden. And 20 years ago, when I met my wife and her 3 kids, I also met my stepson, and now stepson Robert, who is 10 years old and loved Madden. And my problem with the game was always that I would smash everybody. I'd played the game for as long as it's existed. I played every iteration of it, and I would just, murder anyone who played against me. So my project with Robert was to just create a monster, was to teach him all of my tricks. And that anytime I beat him on a deep pass, I would pause the game, show him the replay, and show him the read that I made that made me read that. And then I would never catch him on it again because he would adjust so quickly. And now he's 30 years old. We still have a running Madden franchise. We always do. We're about 7 seasons into our current one. And we're now tied 3-3 on Super Bowls. I've built him into this monster who smashes me regularly now. So I have to keep getting better just to keep up.
That's awesome.
It's awesome. It's been a great experiment. And it was so fun starting off, when he was young, because the draft process was kind of overly complicated. It's a little hard to parse. So what I would do is I would put together every season these 50, 60 page scouting books where I would go through the entire upcoming draft class and write in kind of plain language a little bio for each of the players based on what we knew about their stats and everything. And he'd do all his drafting based on that. So it's just been a wonderful experience to be able to share that with somebody over the course of 20 years.
Yeah.
And watch him evolve into a player who can just beat the snot out of me on a regular basis now. It's great.
Yeah, that is awesome. I mean, just to be able to from one, just to connect with him on that level, and two, to actually have a fair opponent. So.
Right. Yeah. I often wonder if I went too far in that direction. That I shouldn't have held back a couple secrets.
There you go. Well, thank you again for giving us a little bit more insight about yourself and doing the Q box round. But now let's get right into the topic here, and which is basically we're going to be discussing how to gamify your marketing. And I want to provide a little context here because, gamification in itself is kind of the process of keeping people engaged through somewhat gaming mechanics and things like that. And also in particular with what we're going to be talking about too is the use of gamifying other assets. And I know here on the show I've talked about assets before as primarily being media assets or creative assets like videos or images, but in this case I'm actually referring it to more, I guess, in a financial term sense, where an asset is something that can also create revenue for you, or a product, if you will. So just to clarify there. But yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about, is how to gamify your marketing with that context. And The other thing I want to share before we kick off with our first question is what we're going to be talking about today is, as Shawn earlier mentioned about him in comics and stuff. Well,